So driving for work is a little bit messy, a little bit different. We've got the health and safety regulations and we've got the road traffic regs. Who enforces it? Oh, it's a bit messy. Let's jump into the intro. We're going to try and give you a bit of a brief introduction into the law around driving for work. Let's go. What's up peeps, welcome back to Rebranding Safety. Rebranding Safety is the YouTube channel and podcast doing exactly what it says on the tin. So if you're new here, hit subscribe and all the bell and all those magical algorithm thingamajiggies. Rebranding Safety is brought to you by us, Riskfluent. We are now full-time with our consultancy, so if you need any help with this safety stuff, be it the technical stuff around like driving at work, for example, or COSH or fire or anything else, then check out our website below and we can help you out. Also, if you need any help with kind of behavioural, cultural change, human factors, whatever, we love that stuff as well. So check the website out below. There's loads of stuff we can do to help you. Otherwise, we'd just like to chat anyway. Let's get into the video then. Driving for work is a little bit different. It's managed by a couple of different pieces of legislation. So we're going to try and give you a little bit of an introduction into legislation. I want to give a quick shout out to Pete Rushmore from Flagship Partners. They're a specialist in kind of fleet management, FORs and stuff like that. And we had a quick chat with him over the phone to make sure what we're saying is correct. And he gave us a nice little insight into a specialist area. He's coming on the podcast soon, so make sure you follow us on the podcast as well. And go and check out his podcast. He's running 2 now. If you're looking for more kind of professional development around like fleet managers and stuff, then I believe, hopefully I've got this right, Pete, that Fleet Geeks is the place to go. If you're looking to just kind of generally have a little bit more of a chat, but kind of in the fleet industry about loads of different topics, then Half a Dozen Things, which is his other podcast, is a place to go. Okay, let's get into it then. So driving for work. So we've got like a couple of different categories of driving for work, but ultimately to break it down, you've got people that are driving like normal cars, right? So consultants, for example, safety professionals out on the road, engineers out on the road, stuff like that. Then you've got HGVs and buses and stuff like that. So kind of different. There is definitely more onus on the HGVs and stuff like that, and we'll kind of touch on that later on. Firstly, let's just make it really, really clear that driving for work is bloody dangerous. I don't know if you remember a while back on the podcast, we had a gentleman that has designed an app basically to improve driving for work. And some of the stats he was giving us, one of them stuck in my mind that it was like the second most dangerous profession once over 30,000 miles internationally, I believe. We shall put that podcast in the description below so you can listen to that. But just some interesting stats here. According to the provisional statistics produced by the Department of Transport for 2020, there were 115,333 road casualties in Great Britain, with 1,472 killed and 23,486 seriously injured. HSE's work-related road safety task group, in a report published in 2001, estimated that up to a third of all road traffic accidents involved someone who is at work at that time. So this is a serious area. It's something we all take for granted, right? Driving, because we do it all the time. It's so natural to us now. But it is a serious risk for you to manage. Okay, so let's work out what pieces of legislation apply to what when driving for work. So there is not actually any real kind of specific legislation that applies to driving for work. Although there are specific legislations with relation to driving goods vehicles and public transport vehicles. And additional to those, you've got the normal traffic legislation as well. Then you've got the normal health and safety at work regulations legislation as well. So let's try and break this down a little bit. So when it comes to enforcement, you've got the HSE that will be interested in work-related stuff, but when it's on a public highway, it'll be the police that will take precedent in that investigation. They will, in most cases, lead the investigation, and the HSE will kind of assist / get involved with the work-related stuff. So we've got these two worlds kind of working together, road traffic legislation and health and safety legislation. So let's try and break down the health and safety side first. So the Health and Safety at Work Act gives us those general duties to employers to essentially know the risks and manage the risks. And then it gives a general duty for employees to kind of follow the guidance, the processes that are implemented in the name of safety, and kind of not act like a dickhead, basically, right? Then you've got the management of health and safety at work regs, which put an onus on the employer to carry out a risk assessment. And within that risk assessment, you've got to consider the risk to employees, but also other people as well. So other road users in this case. So if we've got work vehicles, then PURE will come into place as well, which is the provision and use of work equipment regulations. Much easier to say PURE. That will basically put an onus on us to make sure that the vehicles are suitable for use, that the employees are not overloading them, that they're using them how they're supposed to be used, that we're doing all the right checks and inspections and so on and so forth. So MOT, servicing, etc. We all know that, right? There's an interesting one in that if it's a private vehicle, PURE doesn't apply, but it does still give us an onus on the employer to kind of make sure that it's suitable for use, if that makes sense. So you wouldn't necessarily have to, depends on how you deal with it, but ultimately you're not legally required to buy or fix a vehicle if it's not fit for purpose, but you do have to kind of do due diligence, so to speak, to make sure that they're not, I don't know, whizzing around on a Morris Minor that hasn't passed its MOT in 10 years. For example. So to kind of put that down in a nutshell, you've got a requirement to assess the risk. So you have to do a risk assessment for driving for work, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're driving heavy goods vehicles or whether you're driving a van or a kind of BMW as a consultant or salesperson, whatever, right? You will also, as an employer, have to make sure that that vehicle is suitable and safe for its use. You'll have to make sure that the driver's got all the correct driver's license, the insurance as well, make sure the insurance is there, and make sure that if it's private insurance, so if it's my own personal insurance, make sure that we've got for business use on there. Sometimes it's all in one, sometimes it's not, and you have to pay extra. You don't make sure the driver is fit for the driving themselves and the extent of driving which you're expecting them to do. And you also have a duty to manage the work schedule. So particularly when we have HGV and so on, where we start getting driver's hours involved, but you've got to kind of schedule that day and make sure that it doesn't introduce the wrong behaviours or the wrong decisions, or poor behaviours and poor decisions, like driving when we're a little bit tired, not taking breaks, speeding, etc. We've got some case studies later on in the video which will kind of put that into a little bit more perspective as well. The employees as well have duties within all of that to make sure they themselves are insured and licensed, to make sure the vehicle that they're using is suitable and safe, to make sure that they are fit themselves, awake, you know, sprightly, fit and healthy enough to do the job that they are required to do as well. They have a requirement in themselves to kind of manage their brakes and take suitable brakes. They have a requirement to report any deficiencies that they spot within the machinery, e.g. the vehicle. A good note here from our friends at Flagship is that HGV drivers, bus drivers and so on are held to a higher account by the traffic commissioner, and actually anything that they do that kind of breaks the law or so on in their own private time and private vehicles will actually more than likely have implications on their professional career as well. So if they're caught speeding and they're a bus driver, it's quite likely that that'll have an impact on their professional career as well. So an interesting note to remember. When it comes to driving on the public highway, you've got various pieces of road traffic legislation that will apply. And a lot of those will actually result in the driver themselves being found liable and not the employer. So speeding is a good example. If you're caught speeding, it will be normally the driver that will receive that punishment, not the employer. So we thought we'd kind of round this all up with some interesting case studies to try and bring this into kind of, well, perspective for us all, right? So the first interesting case would be RV Coates in 2004, which resulted in a successful prosecution of both the driver and the manager. The lorry driver had unfortunately killed a man when he collided with his broken down vehicle. The driver had been driving for 20 hours without a break. And both the driver and the manager were prosecuted to 4 years in jail. The driver for death by dangerous driving, and the manager for manslaughter for failing to prevent the driver from driving excessive hours. Another lesson out of that one is if you've got you need to have a procedure within your company to let your employees know what to do when they break down, and the first thing they say in there should be get out of your car and get away from your car. So provide them with coats and shit so they can go and do that, but get out of your car. In the case of Michael Eaves versus Atkinson's Kitchens and Bathrooms Limited, an employee suffered some serious injuries after falling asleep at the wheel of the van and crashing. That driver was found 1/3 liable for that accident, as they must have, quotes here, as they must have realised the risk of falling asleep at the wheel. The rest of the liability fell on the employer, as they had not done anything to manage the risk of that person working for 19 hours straight. And a more recent one, just to finish on, in December 2019, an LGV driver, Robert Bradley, was found guilty of causing death by careless driving after he killed a cyclist. During the investigation, it was discovered that Mr. Bradley was unable to see the cyclist because the dashboard, you've seen it in vans and lorries many times, was covered with so many ornaments that he couldn't see the cyclist. So you remember when we used to like the van and you put your screw fix down there, you put your McDonald's down there and all of that stuff, and you couldn't see the cyclist, basically that. So there's onus on the driver to make sure they're not blocking that vision as well. And that's a more recent one, that was 2019, and a really interesting case that Flagship brought to our attention. So thank you very much for that. Okay peeps, hopefully that has made a little bit more sense that there is a bit of a messy world when it comes to managing navigating the legislation and driving at work, but ultimately there is a big onus on the employee, which we don't really see in a lot of other places when it comes to health and safety at work, but there is a massive onus and a clear connection to that driver being able to enforce on immediately, completely separate to the employer, with regards to speeding and so on, so as a good example. But there is also a clear requirement on the employer to manage those risks, and there is a clear liability there. So it's a partnership essentially between you and your employee, as all good health and safety should be, for you to manage that risk at work. Don't forget, if you need some help with this stuff, then check out riskfluentlimited.com website in the description below. That's us as a consultancy, and we can come and help you manage this stuff as well. Or go check out Flagship Partners as well, as specialists in kind of fleet management, fleet safety, and so on. There's loads of stuff that they might be able to do to help you. But otherwise, thanks for watching. I hope this video helped. Catch you next week. Safe.